Right. In this video, we'll be talking about the consonant chart of the IPA and moving beyond just the sounds of English. I'm not going to touch on every single new sound. That's more of an exercise for, you know, studying the chart, playing with an interactive IPA chart to hear examples of the sounds, that sort of thing. This video is going to kind of touch the broader themes. So first, let's look at the something more about the meaning of this chart. We already know that each column represents a place of articulation. Each row represents a manner of articulation. But what about that shading? Some of the cells are shaded darker and some are lighter. Some are occupied and some are unoccupied. So an occupied cell, we already know how to read that. That's the symbol represents this manner of articulation, this uh, place of articulation, and then voicing depending on where it is in the cell, left or right. If it's an empty cell, but not shaded, that represents a potential articulation. And now there's a couple of ways. It could be an articulation that's been observed, uh, and we have a way to write it. It's just not a single symbol. So, for example, a symbol with a diacritic. So here we have a symbol for an alveolar sound, but we put this dental diacritic under it to indicate a dental sound. So this is a voiceless dental plosive. That's one of the cells that's empty. Another thing could be that we haven't actually observed it, but nothing in how we understand the phonetics of human languages suggests that it's an impossible sound. It just we haven't quite got to the language that has it yet. So they're possible articulations. An unshaded cell is considered a possible articulation. The shaded cells are considered impossible articulations, either completely physiologically impossible, like the way the human vocal tract is constructed, it's incoherent to think of that as being an articulation of a consonant, or we can manage to make the sound, but it would be really awkward and it would be so much effort that we couldn't speak at the rate that humans tend to speak with that as one of the consonants in our inventory. All right, so we will have a look at some of the new sounds that we get to work with here. And I'm gonna sort of refer to the sequence that's given in the textbook. So we've got different groups. You could say groups of places of articulation. The labial places of articulation, that's bilabial and labiodental. And at the bilabial place of articulation, we have a couple of new symbols, the phi and the beta there. And these in sound are very similar to the F and the V sound. So the and the, that's our labiodental sounds that we know from English, and and v are the sounds, these new sounds here. They're bilabial instead of labiodental, so the teeth aren't involved in the production of these two. Um, Physiologically, we understand that. The articulatory description gives us how they're different from F and V. And in terms of how they sound, I always find that the p and v, these bilabial fricatives, sound quieter than the labiodental p and v. All right. And then moving just a little bit back, we have the labiodental place of articulation. And there we get these two more symbols here, a labiodental nasal and a labiodental approximant. So m and w, m and w. Okay. And we actually do get the labiodental nasal in English. You may have come across it as an allophone of M before labiodental fricatives in words like infer and bat. And the approximant isn't one that we generally get in English, but it is found in the world's languages. And then we have another class of sounds, or it's kind of a class of places, is the coronal sounds. This is a distracting dog. The coronal isn't an official descriptor in the IPA chart, but it basically represents articulations in this general range. Articulations, dental, alveolar, retroflex, postalveolar as well, that are produced with the tip and the blade of the tongue. Okay, so that's sort of we can group them that way according to where on the tongue they're produced. Uh, then we're given the dorsal places of articulation. So this is starting at the palate and going back to the excuse me, the uvula, and then the guttural places of articulation are behind that. So the pharyngeal place, epiglottal, and glottal. So those are uh, helpful there. Um, so that's sort of the scan through places of articulation and some new vocabulary around that. And then the textbook also introduces some new manners of articulation that we don't really encounter in English. We do have a tap in English, but now we have flaps and trills. And I've teased out taps and flaps into two separate rows here just to make a very uh, pedantic point, which is that tap and flap are not synonymous. The way the textbook presents it and the way that a lot of people talk about it, it kind of feels synonymous. And that's not a problem in a lot of the contexts that we talk about the sounds of the world's languages. But they're two separate words and they have two subtly different meanings. And I think it's important to at least know what those differences are, whether or not you bother to focus on them after you get out of the clutches of an instructor who gets picky about this. So a tap is an articulation where the active articulator moves towards the point of articulation, toward the passive articulator, taps it, so touches it, and then retracts along the same path. Tap. A flap is where the active articulator is moving along, it it hits the passive articulator and carries on in the same direction. It flaps against the passive articulator. So those are two very distinct movements. The tap that we have in English, the alveolar tap, the tap is found in other languages. Ara, the tongue moves towards the alveolar ridge, taps it, and comes back. Okay, comes back away. In contrast, the flap, there's the labiodental flap. So that's the tongue, or sorry, the lower lip. The active articulator starts behind the upper teeth and it moves forward, glances off the teeth, and carries on. Ala, ala. The retroflex tap, the tip of the tongue starts in a retroflex position and it sort of uncurls, it straightens out forward, and it glances off the alveolar ridge or thereabouts on its way past. Arda, arda. Okay, so that's taps and flaps. And then trills, which are often treated as, they're part of the same more general class. We have three trills in the IPA, the bilabial trill, alveolar trill, and the uvular trill. Bilabial trill, that's a blah, so the lips. Trill is multiple sort of movements of contact and retraction, contact and retraction. Usually the muscles aren't pushing and then pulling and pushing and pulling, but they're set in a way that the articulators move against each other like that. It's a movement that you find in nature as well, sort of flapping of, blade of grass against something or whatever, in the wind. So the bilabial trill, the alveolar trill, that's with the tip of the tongue against the alveolar ridge, arra, and the uvular trill, that's with the back of the tongue and the uvula. So this is, in this case, the uvula, which is kind of the lighter element of that system, is probably the bit that's moving. Arra. Okay, so there's the taps and the flaps and the trills. And then we have our lateral, two actual classes, two rows for laterals in the IPA. We have the lateral approximants that we're familiar with, like the L sound, the alveolar lateral approximant from English, as well as some other places of articulation for laterals, for approximants. And then the alveolar lateral fricatives, which we get in some languages, one or both of these. And there isn't a lot of New stuff you have to learn about that. Lateral means the air is going around the side. Approximate means the air is going past smoothly enough that it doesn't create turbulence. And fricative means the passage is narrow, so you do get turbulence. So an alveolar approximant central, remember central as opposed to lateral, a central alveolar approximant like r, the air goes through, you don't hear the turbulence, but central alveolar fricative, or z, you get that turbulence. So for an alveolar lateral approximant, the center of the tongue is touching, and you have space around the sides, and the air is flowing by, and you don't hear fricative. You don't hear turbulence. You don't hear friction. That's what I was going for. But with the lateral fricatives, you do. So you have fa. So you same contact in the middle, space around the sides, but that space is narrow enough that the air that's flowing becomes turbulent, and you get that hissy fricative quality. And same with za, the voiced lateral fricative. Za. Um, the only difference between sh and z is that voicing. Okay, so that's the fricatives, lateral fricatives, and that's the new kind of manners of articulation. Are the taps and flaps, and trills, the tap and flaps and trills, and we have these lateral fricatives, which are kind of new. And I think that's enough for this. That's the main overview of the what's new in consonants for now. And so thanks for watching.